Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
So before we dive into the usual political rancor that I'm sure you're used to hearing on this show or throughout the day on whatever online presence you like to listen to, whether it's America One Radio. By the way, we're now on at Progressive Voices, 7 to 8 p.m. Pretty excited about that. Or if you just listen to this show via podcast because you like political podcasts, today I'm going to start with something that's not really political, but very much going to have an impact on the housing market, perhaps even the economy as a result, and something that is, well, actually going to affect me. You see, I am a residential real estate agent, a realtor, and I spent a good bit of the weekend actually showing houses to a couple. This couple, a married couple, happened to be, the daughter anyway, is the daughter of an old coworker of mine from back when I worked in Augusta. And we've been looking at houses. And as of today, I can no longer do that until they sign an agreement with me that I'm going to get compensated. Notice that I said an agreement that I'm going to get compensated. Not that they're going to compensate me, but that I'm going to get compensated when they purchase a home. Anyone who works in or near the real estate spectrum has been asked for the last few months, well, what's going on with the commission structure? Why is there so much news about this? Are you going to be affected? Do you have a job? First of all, remember, real estate agents are independent contractors. It's like asking a guy who owns his own plumbing business, do you still have a job? Still have a business? Nonetheless, let the news sort of explain what has happened, and we'll go from there.
The National Association of Realtors has agreed to pay $418 million in damages to settle class action antitrust lawsuits over broker commissions. That money will go first to pay the plaintiffs' lawyer fees and then will go to the class. The settlement, though, makes clear that NAR is denying any wrongdoing. Now, the lawsuits argued that NAR, with its more than 1 million brokerage members, violated antitrust laws by setting certain requirements that led to a standard commission. The settlement now bans the NAR from making any set rules that would let a seller's agent compensate for a buyer's agent. The norm had been the 5 to 6% commissions, although the NAR said in a call today that they vehemently denied that there are any set commissions, saying they are always negotiable. But what this means is that the agent market will now get much more competitive, which could in turn lower commissions. That could, of course, have an effect on home prices because sellers and buyers generally factor in the cost of the commission depending on the selling price. If they have to pay less commission, the seller can lower the price, or the buyer could actually just offer less. Now, in addition, on the MLS, the listing service for all homes, the settlement says all fields that show broker compensation have to be wiped out. And there's also a ban on the requirement that agents subscribe to MLSs in the first place in order to get commissions. So this could have huge ramifications for membership to the NAR, which as of now is one of the most powerful lobbying organizations in the country.
That is Diana Olick from CNBC, and this was like 4 months ago. So let me dissect what happened in some realm. And notice she mentioned right away the $418 million settlement. First thing she mentioned was lawyer fees. First thing paid, lawyer fees. I want to hone in on that because I happen to think that this lawsuit was much ado about abso-damn-lutely nothing. If you were a home seller and pivoted to say in a lawsuit, hey, I didn't know I was going to have to pay the buyer's brokerage representation fee as well, you're a damn liar. Unless you inherited property. If you inherited a home and sold it, okay, maybe you didn't know that. Maybe you didn't. That's on your agent, your listing agent, for not informing you what all goes into selling a home. Not the NAR, not whatever brokerage that independent agent is contracted to work through, but the agent. That's on them. But by and large, if you previously had bought a home, lived in it 10, 20, 30 years, whatever, and then turned around and sold it, and are howling like a scalded dog because of commission fees or went through the process, paid the commissions, and then found out later, well, half the commission you paid your listing agent, they gave to the buyer's agent, then you obviously don't remember when you bought that home that was the case then too, that you benefited from that situation. You didn't pay your buyer agent representation. You can't tell me you went into that lawsuit, that class action suit, acting like you didn't remember. Well, I firmly believe you do act like you don't remember that. But that's how it was. You buy a house, up until now, you buy a house, you don't pay your buyer agent, by and large. There are exceptions to that rule. I could come up with several options, but now we'll have to. But you didn't pay your buyer agent representation. Why? Because the seller paid the agent representation. And why would the seller do that? Well, for several reasons. When you put a house on the market, your agent isn't going to be the one coming to the door every time to show a new buyer the house. I mean, that can happen, in which case you're going to pay your agent even more because you agree to pay your agent whatever commission you offer to pay them, 4%, 5%, 6%, usually. But if another agent shows your home, brings the buyer, the pre-approved for the mortgage buyer, or knows that they have the cash to pay for it buyer, they've already found the buyer for you, and they brought the buyer to you. They are showing the house on your behalf without interrupting your life, really. We schedule them, and there's a lockbox, and you don't have to be there. You may be away at work, or you taking the day to be out of the house to let buyers look at houses on the weekend, as is usually the case. Yeah, the buyer agent did all that for you. Found you a buyer, pre-qualified, pre-approved, screened the process, brought a qualified buyer to you. They're showing the house. They're going to draw up the contract. They're going to submit the offer. And here's the thing. This may not even be the offer you accept. You would hopefully get multiple offers. Yeah, that's the ticket. You want multiple offers. You can drive up your price that way. You can get 2 similar offers, 3 or more similar offers, and then say, guys, all the offers are about the same, and I can't decide which one to choose, so I'm going to ask you for your highest and best offer. We're going to give you all a chance to revise your offer and offer your highest and best. That drives up the sales price. So you get more money that way, right? Let me counter this thought. If you now, as of today, in fact, I've got to get that couple to sign a buyer brokerage agreement that insists that I will get paid. Not by them necessarily. We'll get to that in a minute. If you offer no compensation whatsoever, and now that's the new landscape in real estate, there's no mention of buyer brokerage compensation. And I'll get to how we're dealing with that in the industry in a little bit. But if anyone thinks that buyers are now going to be saddled with paying their agent representation on top of the down payment, earnest money deposit up front, part of the down payment eventually, the inspection, there's so many closing costs that come into this. That could be up to 3% of the home purchase too. And, oh, by the way, another 2 to 3% of the home purchase to pay for their agent representation. Well, you're pricing a lot of buyers out of the home buying market. That's already a problem with interest rates being what they are, with home prices still going up because the supply isn't there and the demand is. You're just going to put a lot more people on the sidelines. And that's going to have an opposite effect on home prices eventually. You as a seller, those multiple offers you were mulling over, well, you'll be good to get one. And you're not driving up the sales price of your home then, are you? When you only have the one, you're happy to accept it. It's an offer. It's either exactly what you wanted or close enough, and you're like, let's just find it works. Let's go with it. And even then, chances are now they're going to offer and ask for some sort of concession in money to pay for their agent commission. So that's sort of the new landscape today. I think you heard how I parsed it out. Chances are most buyers are going to submit offers now asking for, I don't know, maybe 2-3% back more in closing costs for whatever they want to do. Before, when you signed to sell a house through your agent, it wasn't actually you who was paying the buyer brokerage representation. It was your agent. You were paying your agent 5-6%, whatever you negotiated. Maybe it's 4%. I happen to have a listing in Gwinnett that we negotiated. That's what we do. We always negotiate. I always negotiated the commission because the sellers have certain scenarios that they've got to play out when they turn around and sell their house to buy a house. And I take that into account, especially if I want to work on the buying transaction as well. Hey, I will gladly take 2% of 2 transactions versus 3% of 1. Do the math. It's better. But I do that because commissions are always negotiable. They always have been. I've been doing this 5 years. I've never not had that question come up. And in some cases, had the seller or the buyer say, so we're going to need to do this when we sell in order to buy. Okay, I'll take all that into account. But at the end of the day, no, the seller wasn't paying the buyer's representation. The agent was. Their agent was. You were paying your agent 4, 5, 6% to do their job. And part of their job is finding the buyer. And the other agent, for usually the other company, hey, look, I found you a buyer. Oh, cool. Let me compensate you for that. That's how it worked. That's how it worked. You weren't directly paying the buyer agent. Your agent was. It'd be like, say you needed to hire a plumber to come do some work in your home. You got an estimate and they told you it's going to be, $650. Okay, fine. $650 it is. And they get the work done and you find out later that come home, work's done, looks good. And you pay them. And then you find out through the grapevine, by the way, I saw your ex going into your house the other day. What's up with that? What do you mean? Yeah, they were going in with the plumber. Hold on a second. You found out that your plumber had hired like an ex of yours and that your ex was in there working. Plumber didn't know that. Maybe your ex didn't even know that was your place at that point in time. And you call the plumber and you go, did you hire so-and-so? Yeah, why? Why are you asking that? That's kind of weird. Well, I used to date so-and-so, and I don't appreciate that you hired them and used them to work on my plumbing in my home. Plumber doesn't know that, first of all. Second of all, what business is it of you, what your plumber does with the money you gave them to do their business? I mean, it's a little weird scenario, I guess. I'm just trying to say that at the end of the day, you were paying your listing agent to do their job. Whatever the listing agent did with the money that you agreed to pay them, it's really, I hate to sound like Governor Tim Walz, none of your damn business. But it kind of isn't any of your business. There are all sorts of other fees that your listing agent pays too, by the way. Photographer, marketing, signage, the lockbox, all the fees associated with just being a realtor and having their license, etc. There are lots of fees that you also pay that you don't have insight into. But paying the buyer representation, I know you think it's like a courtroom scenario. Well, if I'm the plaintiff, why should I pay the defendant's attorney to? It's not that way. It's not that way at all. It's a cooperative agreement, honestly. And you paid your listing agent, whether it's 3%, 4%, 5%, 6% of the sales price, to do their job. And it just so happens that part of doing their job is working in cooperation with other agents in the multiple listing service that your home is in to bring in a qualified buyer and let them show the house and get them under contract. And you get an offer or offers to pour over to decide which one you want, accept it, go through the whole process of inspection and appraisal, and you have to nuance all that, and then get to the closing table where everybody's happy. Money's there, you get paid, you move on to your next home. All right, dive into this a little bit more when the Ron Show returns on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast. Follow The Ron Show on your preferred social media platform. That would be at Ron Show ATO. Facebook, Twitter X, Instagram, Threads. Facebook is where I post each day's podcast after it's aired on America One Radio and Progressive Voices. RonShowATL.com for that, where you get the show notes as well. It was ABC 7 Chicago's Liz Nagy, who had one of those Sunday morning talk shows, where she had a real estate attorney and a real estate broker on to discuss what's going to happen. What are the changes? What do we expect to happen here? I want you to listen to a little bit of this conversation because I find it pretty interesting.
Here to talk about what all these changes mean for home buyers and for home sellers are Tommy Choi. He's the co-founder of Weinberg Choi Residential, a real estate brokerage firm, and real estate lawyer Heather Neveu with Chilton Yambert Porter LLP. Thank you both for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so Heather, let's start with you. Let's start at the beginning here. Let's say you're buying a home, you have a real estate agent, now you have to sign a contract before you can even begin showing homes. So what is that contract? What does it mean for buying a home?
So as a result of the NAR settlement, buyers are going to be asked to sign a representation agreement with the brokerage where their agent works. So it's going to be an agreement where the buyer is agreeing to compensate the realtor for the work they're performing. So it's going to be an agreement that outlines what's expected of the realtor and also what's expected of the client as part of the transaction.
And I guess for either of you, is this something new, and how much is this going to change the process of buying and selling a home?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that because it isn't new. It's something that's always been around, a buyer-broker agreement. It's something that's most real estate agents have practice. Now it's just something that's going to become even more clear and part of the process when it comes to home buying.
So do you guys have the same perspective on it? Do you see this as an improvement, something that clarifies the process, or does it gum up the works a little, so to speak?
Go for it.
From my perspective, I think it gums up the works a little bit. I think it's going to be a short-term thing because I don't think it was widely used. It was a tool that was available. Realtors had that at their disposal to use, but it wasn't widely implemented, and now it will be. So I think there might just be a learning curve involved as buyers are going to be now across the board shown this agreement, and the responsibility for paying their realtor is now going to shift to the buyer, where before a agent representing a buyer was able to honestly tell their client, you don't have to pay me, the seller's agent. The seller is really who's paying me. That's where the funds are coming from. And so now buyers are going to have to be educated on their options concerning how they pay their realtor.
Let me go back and hone in on this one little part of what Heather was saying.
The seller is really who's paying me. That's where the funds are coming from.
That's absolutely not true, though. The buyer and their mortgage lender, or if it's a cash offer, their bank account, that's where the funds are coming from all along. This is honestly just a rearranging of the deck chairs. Really it is, because if you want to buy a home, but you don't have the 3 or 3.5% to put down, plus another 2-3% to pay your agent, but you really want to buy the house, and the seller's going to offer some closing costs or concessions anyway, you have to decide, are those closing costs for you, or are those closing costs going to help you pay for your agent? And if those closing costs aren't enough to take care of some of the things that you need to take care of, like you're buying a house, but it needs fresh paint or new carpeting, and the seller knows that, but they're not going to fix it themselves, and you're telling yourself, well, I'm not paying out of pocket for that. I'm buying something that it's like buying a car. If you go to the car lot and you realize that tire's flat, well, are you going to buy it for the price that the car salesman wants to sell it to you for, or are you going to insist that they fix that tire or give you money to get the tire fixed? Yeah, so this is just going to kind of muddy up the process a little bit more, but at the end of the day, the buyer has always been paying for their buyer agent commission because they're the ones that brought the money to the transaction in the first place. It was just getting filtered through the seller back to the seller's agent and then back to the buyer agent in the first place. Now, the buyer is involved in negotiating that their agent gets paid at all. Also now, the buyer agent has to go through this process of calling the listing agent. See, we have to do all this work now that we didn't have to before to find out, is there some wiggle room for agent compensation? I have buyers, for example, that want me to drive up to Dawson County to show them a house. Well, that's gas money. Am I getting paid for this? I kind of need to know. And now we get to make that awkward phone call between each other. And real estate agents are really bad about answering the phone when they don't know who's calling them. Great. So what will happen now is if you're going to buy a house and you're working with an agent, they're going to put a contract in front of you. Hey, I'm going to get paid this amount, or I'm going to get paid this percentage, and you're going to help me do that. I'm telling you as a buyer, if your agent's doing a really good job, then you probably still aren't going to necessarily fork out the funds yourself immediately to pay for that. And it could create this chain of events down the road where maybe it's your mortgage lender that winds up paying your real estate commission, because the lending business, the mortgage industry, obviously wants people to continue buying houses too. All right, that's how they continue staying in business. And there was actually a company doing that. Better used to have a real estate division. Their mortgage division actually had a real estate division as well, and they had agents who were salaried agents who just got bonuses when they helped people buy and sell a house. I could conceive of that coming in the offing in the very near future, but that's speculation. Any more questions about this, don't hesitate to ask. 404-919-2725, ron at ronshowatl.com.
Want to be on the show? Have a cause or campaign you'd like to speak up for? Email Ron at ronshowatl.com or call 404-919-2725. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
Ooh, y'all, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is loaded with opinion pieces after a few weeks of up and down roller coaster, breathtaking pearl clutchery after Georgia State School Superintendent Richard Woods hinted at the fact that the AP African American Studies course wasn't going to be offered. Actually, he didn't hint. He came out and said, we're not paying for that. And then got pushback, not just from the African American community, but even bipartisan pushback. First from Democrats and then from Governor Brian Kemp and some Republicans as well, as to why Richard Woods was going to do that. Literally, Brian Kemp sent a letter and made the letter public, wondering, what's with the rationale? What do you think? What is your thinking on this? The irony is Brian Kemp signed a bill into law that Richard Woods finally said, well, it's this divisive concepts law that you guys passed 2 years ago. How I see it is the AP African American Studies curriculum in our public schools violates the divisive concept law. To which a lot of us on the left were like, see, we told y'all this was going to happen. We did. We were all like, we told you this was going to be used to do just this very thing. There's been so much talk about critical race theory, CRT. It's the evil, the demise of intellectual thought, or history curriculum in American classrooms. Heaven forbid we have a critical look at all the racial fractures and fissures that any adult who can fog a mirror in this country knows has existed for a very long time and still has modern day implications and ramifications. We can't teach that. The more we learn, the more, I guess it's, the kids, the white kids in the classroom, well, they'll feel guilty. Can I just tell you, my little nerdy white butt sat in Georgia public school classrooms from grades 1 through 12. I did kindergarten at a private kindergarten at my dad's employer's hospital kindergarten. Anyway, so grades 1 through 12, I sat through that classroom curriculum the entire time. First time we were taught about the Civil War and what it meant, I was going to say like maybe third grade. I never once thought, oh gosh, I feel so guilty. It never came to my mind. I watched Henry Louis Gates documentaries on PBS about the Jim Crow era after the Civil War and all the racism. I never felt... I watched The Help. Fantastic movie. I never once felt guilty because I wasn't involved. Did I see through the rage or feel disgusted? Well, yeah, obviously I was disgusted. I can't believe people thought like that. And it wasn't all that long ago. But I never felt guilty. If anything, I felt more aware. Did I ever tell you the story? I don't think I have. Where it was back in my hometown of Grovetown. We hired a fire chief for our volunteer fire department. And it just so happens that fire chief that they hired, I don't know how this slipped under the radar, but it was a small town, maybe 3,500 people at the time. And the mayor wasn't like a full-time salaried position. I think the city clerk was, the zoning commissioner was, and just about everybody else was part-time. The police chief was a full-time employee, and the fire chief. I don't even think the fire chief was a full-time position because, again, it was a volunteer department. So they hired a fire chief, mid-'80s, late 80s. Come to find out that fire chief had once been a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Well, that got out. That made headlines. And some people were rightfully concerned. I mean, if a black person calls in a fire and the former Klan leader, fire chief, takes the call, are y'all coming? Hello, is anybody there? This thing on? So it was a little bit of a concern, right? And there was a lot of pushback. In fact, there was a lot of support for the guy, which, listen, if he had, washed his hands, absolved himself of the Klan, that's all fine and well. The NAACP eulogized a senator from West Virginia who used to be a member of the Ku Klux Klan because he absolved himself of being in the Klan and became such an advocate for civil rights that all is forgiven. We're taught in Sunday school that, if you absolve yourself of your sins and you ask for forgiveness and ask to be saved, that, that's all in the past. It's a reset, right? If we can't walk the earth like that, then we certainly can't go to church and talk about that and act like that's the case in just that one scenario. So there were those who defended the fire chief. And then there were those who defended the affiliation, former affiliation, to the point that my hometown of Grovetown, Georgia, eventually had a Klan rally, a march down, literally a parade application, a march down the main street, Robinson Avenue. And the folks that I saw lining up to support them were folks that I knew and wasn't aware. It's not, and I'm not saying that all Trump fans, by the way, are racist. I am saying it's not all that indifferent than what I've experienced just personally since, say, 2015 when Trump announced his run and the fanaticism that followed from those. And you know who they are. You know who these folks are. The fanatics, the absolute buys the shirts and hats and flags fanatics. People who are like, I thought they were smarter than that. Or I thought they were a bit more reserved in their zealotry or their xenophobia or their racism or their homophobia. Yeah, I learned a lot about people that I grew up knowing, elders in the community, some in my church, and what their views were on race at that point in time. It was eye-opening. I was maybe 12 years old, 13 at the time. It was very eye-opening. Okay, I got off on a little bit of a side rail there. Let's get back to the conversation about the Georgia school superintendent sort of revealing himself a little bit. He's along that parade route, it seems anyway, because he used the Georgia Divisive Concepts Law as a rationale for eliminating state funding for AP African American Studies. This from Fox 5 WAGA Television.
State School Superintendent Richard Woods said that he pulled the course and its funding because he thought it violated the state's Divisive Concepts Law. Fox 5's Kevin Stewart has been following the story from the beginning and joined us now. So it's a big never mind from the state school superintendent?
Yeah, it looks like this is the letter from the AG that is supposed to clear all of this up. He said the law is very clear, which has people wondering why this controversy started in the first place.
Right.
I'm thankful for the Attorney General and the Governor, Brian Kemp, for, standing against Dr. Wood.
Rashad Brown, he's an AP African American Studies consultant with the College Board. That's the group that oversees advanced placement courses. He's still trying to figure out how we got here.
I'm not sure why he took us on this long journey, but thankfully there is change that's going to be implemented immediately.
Brown and other critics contend the state school superintendent, Richard Woods, applying the state's Divisive Concepts Law to the AP course was a stretch. On last Sunday's episode of the Georgia Gang, panelist and state school board member Martha Zoller said the law did not apply to AP classes.
He made a huge mistake in all of the statements he's made related to this. The statute that he quoted actually has an exception for AP courses.
Now, in a letter from State Attorney General Chris Carr to a lawmaker who helped craft the Divisive Concepts Law. The AG opined the law does not apply to AP, IB, or dual enrollment courses. In a statement, Woods says, quote, "As I have said, I will follow the law. In compliance with this opinion, the AP African American Studies course will be added to the state-funded course catalog effective immediately."
Jack Bernard is a retired business executive, former chair of the Jasper County Commission and Republican Party as well. His opinion piece appearing in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, I will include it in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Again, a former Jasper County Republican Party leader whose headline on the opinion is, "Racism is not dead in Georgia, as AP African American Studies furor showed." Jack Bernard writes, "It was clear that parts of the coursework for the AP African American Studies program did violate the law, according to Georgia State School Superintendent Richard Woods." That's him quoting the school superintendent. And then he writes, "The legislation to which Richard Woods is referring is the highly controversial 2022 Georgia Law 20-1-11, which prohibits teaching of, quote, divisive concepts. Woods has danced back and forth on this essential issue, the study of African American history being taught in Georgia schools like a drunken sailor." Let me reread that so that you understand what Jack Bernard, a Jasper County Republican leader, is saying. The legislation to which Richard Woods is referring to is the highly controversial 2022 Divisive Concepts Law, which prohibits teaching of divisive concepts. Woods has danced back and forth on this essential issue like a drunken sailor. Bernard continues, he has now approved the course for state funding. If Woods was not so pitiful and the issue so important, his outrageous, contrary, confusing actions would be hilarious. Y'all, I'm reading words written by a Republican from Jasper County. The legislation that Woods cited as cause for his concern is House Bill 1084, which prohibits teaching of, quote, divisive concepts as derived from a Trump administration policy, whatever that is. When I speak to some of my younger, well-to-do friends and relatives, they tell me racism in America is dead. I tell them that they are living in a fantasy. Disney World. However, this recent controversy over the AP African American Studies course qualifying as a divisive concept has proven me correct. Again, I'm reading from Jack Bernard, former Jasper County Republican County official. Without getting too far into the weeds, a sorely needed in-depth AP African American Studies program teaching the history of black people in America was being piloted in 33 schools in Georgia last year. The idea was to prove its value and then expand it statewide via state funding. Oh, God. Could you imagine? As is commonly done with their pilot courses. However, per a mid-July statement released by his spokeswoman, Woods, quote, opted not to recommend this course for a state approval at this time. The practical effect, Jack Bernard writes, of this action was to remove state funding from a course that was already being offered in these schools. The entire cost would be dumped onto already hard-pressed county and city school districts, effectively killing the course. But it is an election year. The GOP knows that Georgia is a key state and every vote counts. So, Governor Brian Kemp publicly questioned Woods' decision, which led the superintendent to acknowledge that he felt the course violated the divisive concepts prohibitions, especially the topic of the intersectionality of race and gender and experiences of bias. In yet another statement to clarify his previous unintelligible position, Woods stated the course did not include, quote, comparative narrative with opposing views on this and other topics, and thus teaching the course was illegal. Jack Bernard continues, unfortunately for Woods, as well as the residents of Georgia, his supposed clarification did nothing to resolve the question of why he did not approve the course and will it get state reimbursement. And how do you construct a, quote, comparative narrative? Is the course supposed to say that slavery benefited black slaves because it gave them skills? Jack Bernard asks. That laughable malarkey has been stated before by at least one Southern politician, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And no one bought it then either. Do I need to remind you Jack Bernard is a former Jasper County Republican official? He continues. So running for cover, Woods then dumped the matter into the legal system, saying that he, quote, asked for legal clarification from conservative GOP Attorney General Chris Carr. And should the ruling reverse my decision, then I will follow the law. Jack Bernard continues, well, that was a true relief for all of us, Superintendent Woods. Apparently, Carr is a lot more politically savvy and better organized than Woods. Carr responded confidentially to Woods, but also to the author of the Divisive Concepts Law. Carr told Representative Will Wade of Dawsonville, a Kemp ally, that the course could be funded so long as it complied with the law. Jack Bernard writes, "We do not know what Carr stated to Woods. The state school superintendent is still vague, but he will now permit the course to be offered in the state course list, which apparently means that the state will fund it. Maybe. What a totally avoidable mess." Woods was once a high school teacher before he became a politician, elected to statewide office. We should all be better off if he went back to the classroom. Again, authored by Jack Bernard, a retired business executive, former chair of the Jasper County Commission, and Republican Party. Mr. Bernard's piece appears in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'll give you that, of course, in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. There are actually several opinion pieces written about this. Maureen Downey, with the AJC on the editorial board, I would presume, she wrote an opinion piece as well. The headline pretty much tells you, Georgia's Divisive Concepts Law spawned AP African American Studies debacle, and which I find funny. It's like Brian Kemp signed that bill into law and then wants to, I guess, act as if he's unaware what his own party's elected state school superintendent is talking about when he pulls the AP African American Studies funding. Not at all aware, I guess, not seeing the breadcrumbs that led to why that was. Another opinion piece, by the way, filed by Clennon L. King, headline, "Black folks, not the state, must teach our children our history." I'll give you Clennon's opinion piece in just a few minutes, and I don't disagree with him, but I actually happen to think that it's not just their history, it's our nation's history, and that all school children should learn from it. It would actually better our political dialogue in the future, which is why I think there's so much pushback from conservatives, and laws like these divisive concept laws came into being. Notice that I said laws. Yeah, because Georgia's not the only state that hastily enacted one. Back after this on The Ron Show. We're in the home stretch on The Ron Show. If this show is brand new to you, as we appear now in a weeknight time slot of Progressive Voices, 7 to 8 p.m., well, welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming on in. Always provide the show notes. You hear me read something, you hear me cite something, you hear me reel off something that's playing from a news channel. I cite my sources, ronshowatl.com, each day when we post the podcast, so that you can listen to it in its entirety whenever you like, either from the website or whatever podcast platform you prefer to do so. Although, I must tell you, if you're listening on America One Radio or Progressive Voices, by all means, just make that part of your schedule. We are 9 to 10 a.m., 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio, has its own app, or 7 to 8 p.m. weeknights on TuneIn via Progressive Voices, which, by the way, also plays through Apple Music. I told you I was going to read this opinion piece from Clennon L. King. First of all, let me give you a little background on Clennon so you'll know where he's coming from. Clennon L. King is an historian and award-winning filmmaker. He recently produced the 5-minute documentary How Albany Became Georgia's Blackest Major City and is developing a digital Black Heritage Trail in his native Dougherty County. That's the footnote at the bottom of his opinion piece in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution as it appeared over the weekend. As I mentioned, you'll get this in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Clennon writes, "My father, a civil rights lawyer, shared a secret with me in 1988 as he lay on his deathbed. He expressed regret in filing suit to desegregate schools in South Georgia. How odd coming from the man who the world knew as the legendary C.B. King, Georgia's only black lawyer based south of Atlanta during Jim Crow. For him, new textbooks, improved teacher salary, and access to better facilities were little consolation. He felt instead the legal victories exacted too high a price, fracturing our community and laying the groundwork for the school-to-prison pipeline we know today. The wisdom of Dad's worldview came into clear focus last month for me personally. That's when Georgia's school superintendent pulled what can only be called a Ron DeSantis, leveling an attack on teaching black history inside the classroom. State Superintendent Richard Woods announced a ban on the use of state funds to teach an advanced placement course in African American history, setting off a political firestorm. To their credit, black state lawmakers forced his hand, and with a less than supportive governor and state attorney general looking on, the state school system's top man reversed his decision. Were Dad alive, Glennon writes, his message to black voters would be clear and unequivocal. Send Mr. Woods packing should he run for a fourth term. You believe the guy's been serving 3 terms already? King writes, but my father would also argue that black folk must own their part in a deeper problem. He would insist we must return to the business of teaching our own children our history. Let's face it, Koreans don't rely on the Chinese to school their kids on who they are and what they've been through, nor do Arabs rely on Israelis for that, or vice versa. So why do we as a people continue to entrust the education of our children to a system that, historically speaking, has never had our interests at heart, he asks. It would be unreasonable. Dad would say, to expect Woods, a white Republican from Tifton who spent the bulk of his career in Osceola schools, to appreciate what's at stake here. On the other hand, he'd say, black folk should know better and do better. In his case of native Albany, Georgia and Southwest Georgia, he'd argue, there's plenty of content to teach. In his eyes, his hometown was more than the site of the first major civil rights campaign after Montgomery, led in part by his client, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. It was more than the birthplace of Grammy Award-winning Ray Charles and Olympic gold medalist Alice Coachman. He'd share the name of Illinois Representative William Levy Dawson, an Albany native who spent nearly 30 years in office and was the only black person in Congress between 1943 and 1945. He'd mention Albany native Bobby Rush, who also served Chicago in the U.S. House for 3 decades and who was the only politician to ever beat Barack Obama. And at the risk of appearing boastful, Dad would utter his own name, and quite deservingly. Long before Stacey Abrams, Andrew Young, and John Lewis entered politics, Dad was the first black person in Georgia to run for Congress since Reconstruction, and the first ever to run for governor, and the first federal courthouse in the former Jim Crow South, named for a black person, was named for him. He'd want black kids to see their own promise in Albany native Osceola McCarthy Adams, co-founder of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, who performed on Broadway and directed Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte before they became household names. He'd want them to walk a little taller, knowing Albany is the ancestral hometown of poet Nikki Giovanni, Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and the Grammy Award-winning Isley Brothers, that the bloodlines of Cissy and Whitney Houston, Dionne Warwick and Patti LaBelle all lead to Southwest Georgia. Even Denzel Washington, whose late mother, Lennis Williams Washington, was born in nearby Camilla, is a native son, 1 generation removed. Echoing Dad's sentiment, I also think it's imperative our youth know the region's backstory, namely how Albany became Georgia's blackest major city. They must grasp that America's primary goal from the start was to be a world empire, and making cotton and making it king was the means by which to achieve it. It would explain to them why then-President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act that sent Native Americans packing before white settlers engaged in a massive land grab. And it would inform our kids why enslaved black folk were then marched on foot from the tobacco, indigo, and rice fields of Virginia and the Carolinas to what became the cotton fields of Southwest Georgia and beyond. It would shed light on the plantations still in existence and the high numbers of our people, he writes, who once planted, picked, hauled, ginned, baled, stored, and eventually shipped this, quote, white gold down the Flint to the Gulf and the world market. Why else would W.E.B. Du Bois dedicate 2 chapters in The Souls of Black Folk to Albany, the capital and the cornerstone of Southwest Georgia's Cotton Kingdom, he asks? Why else would he nickname us the Egypt of the Confederacy? And why else would Dougherty County be home to the largest single sale of enslaved Americans in the state and the second largest in the nation? Clennon L. King continues, teaching these histories rooted in truth and love can't help but instill pride, self-confidence, and self-love in our children, helping them contextualize white wealth and power and the debt owed. There's the problem, he finishes. And what better place to enlighten them than in the black church with its legacy of opening doors to youth to foster community uplift and change? That way we are no longer putting ourselves at the mercy of outsiders, the state, or the party in power. Instead, we are celebrating our history, prioritizing our children, and placing their education of self where Dad always felt it belonged, in our own hands. My only disagreement being, Black history is American history, and all children need to know about this. It will better our political and civil dialogue going forward. That'll be in the show notes, along with everything else you heard today at RonShowATL.com. Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m., 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio, 7 to 8 p.m. at Progressive Voices, or wherever you podcast. Have yourselves a great Monday.